Okay, so while the Prime Minister urged party leaders to get on the same page when dealing with Donald Trump, the parties remain deeply divided in the House of Commons. The logjam that has continued for more than 2 months in the House will break briefly, I need to stress, over the next few days. That's when the opposition will push once more to bring the government down. Now, despite all of this, the Liberals insist they will be able to pass key spending bills before the House breaks for the holidays. That's up to Karina Gould in a big way. She is the government House leader, and she joins me now. Minister Gould, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, David.
So this logjam is temporarily broken by this ruling from Speaker Greg Fergus, scheduling essentially the opposition days, which allows you to get to your supply days. Do you think this is a workable compromise? Do you think this will allow you to do what you need to do before we all break for the holidays?
Yes, I do. Look, I mean, the important thing, and again, this is kind of in the weeds, but we have to get these opposition days done by December 10th in order to get the estimates through, which, you know, is spending government money for Canadians. And that's a really important thing, and it's one of the foundational reasons why Parliament exists. I will point out that, you know, I had scheduled opposition days last week, and I moved a motion to get them through the House, and the Conservatives said no. You know, Mr. Poilievre was tweeting on the weekend saying that, you know, he wanted to bring forward this motion. I gave him an opportunity on Monday, and he said no. But Speaker Fergus, relying on a ruling from 1990 when Parliament was in a similar but different situation, but the opposition days had not yet been scheduled, and the Speaker of the House at the time made those opposition days happen, is doing the same thing. And so We're in a bit of uncharted, unprecedented territory, although Speaker Fergus created some new precedent here.
Okay, so the estimates bill, that's about $22 billion, or just shy of $22 billion of spending. Can that be filibustered? You know, is this something that you're definitely going to get a vote on, or could you end up with another situation similar to the privilege motion that's been paralyzing things? They'll get their opposition days, they'll vote on those, but your business is not their business. Do you anticipate that you can get that through?
Yeah, so I do anticipate that we can get that through, because the way that it works is that as soon as the last opposition day is completed, then you move into voting on the supply bill. Now, that could be a lot of votes, right, depending on what the Conservatives do. So we could be into, you know, one of those vote marathons. But you know, we're prepared to be here and to vote on it if and as needed. So.
Okay, right before our program came on, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, had a press conference, and she was asked repeatedly about the ability to deliver a fall economic statement in the House, and she sounded very unsure. Now, I know you don't have to necessarily do it in Parliament, but it's been the practice and tradition of this government to do it there, because the expectation with the border measures that you may have to implement to deal with Donald Trump's threats could require parliamentary approval. How confident are you, given everything, that you can do a fall economic statement if it includes new measures to deal with the demands of the president-elect?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think it's, you know, as I was listening to you and Catherine speaking, one to put back onto the Conservatives. I mean, you know, like, it's time to stop playing these ridiculous games, and if they want to, as they claim, put Canada first, like, let's actually put Canada first and allow that work to happen. You know, the reason why the Speaker made this ruling is because the Conservatives are continuing to filibuster and block and obstruct, and the Speaker said, no, supply takes precedent over privilege. We have to get this done. It's one of the functions of Parliament. And so, you know, when today the Prime Minister, as you mentioned, brought together all the leaders of the opposition, because when we're facing, you know, these threats of these tariffs and these challenges, like, we need to come together and stand up for Canada. We don't need to be, you know, like, there's always going to be things that we disagree on, but it shouldn't be about protecting Canadians and the Canadian economy. So, I mean, I think this is a really good question to put back to the Conservatives to say, you know, it's time to get on with it. It's time to make sure that we are actually there to deliver for Canadians. And Mr. Poilievre and his Conservative MPs also have a responsibility to Canadians. And it's not just about partisan sniping and partisan attacks. Like, there's real things that we have to deal with, and that's something that we all need to do.
But the Conservatives have suggested that they would allow some sort of a border response package to go through. So have you spoken with Andrew Scheer, the Conservative House leader, about this? Have there been any conversations about when and if this happens? Because I know that you can maybe to use the technical term, reprofile existing money to deploy it to the border measures, but some of it may require legislative changes or extra approval from Parliament. So if you talk to the Conservative House Leader about that.
Not about this specifically, but I do raise with him on a regular basis about, when we're going to get back to work and deliver for Canadians. And I would say that what I hear from the Conservatives is a lot of, Pierre's parroted talking points as opposed to, anything substantial or real in return, or quite frankly, things that they're just, making up as excuses. So, if that is the case, and certainly I haven't heard that directly from the Conservatives, then, we will, as we have been doing the entire time, work constructively with any and all opposition parties to make sure that we are delivering for Canada. So look, at this point in time, the privilege debate, the obstruction from the Conservatives continues. We're going to break that for the opposition days, just like we did last week to get the GST bill through the House of Commons and deliver that GST holiday for Canadians. So there are ways for us to do this, and certainly, my objective this entire session has been about how do we get things done for Canadians. We've gotten a couple of things done, but we need to make sure that all of us, regardless of partisan stripe and background, are squarely focused on standing up for Canada and delivering for Canadians.
But, Minister, just to focus on the filibuster in the House for a second, it seems like this is never going to end because the House has voted to compel the government to turn over unredacted documents. Redacted documents have been turned over, so it doesn't comply with the order. I know the Speaker has said, let's send it to a committee and let the committee deal with it there, and the Conservatives are standing in the way of that. But you could hand over the unredacted documents, or they could back down and let it go to committee, and neither side seems willing to do that. And so now your legislative agenda, except for these exceptional moments that are either brokered in a moment of crisis or ordered by the Speaker, are the only way to do anything. I mean, surely there has to be a way for this to give, or it's going to go on until the election.
Yeah, well, David, look, I feel very strongly that it's the government's responsibility to protect the rights of Canadians, to not interfere with police independence, and to protect the separation of powers in this country. And I would expect that any government of any stripe would feel the same way. Just because the Conservatives want to break Parliament doesn't mean we should allow them to do that. And so, they are playing these ridiculous partisan games that, quite frankly, are dangerous and they're silly, and we can't really allow that to happen. But at the same time, I can assure you, and I can assure all Canadians, that I'm in constant conversation with opposition parties about seeing how we can move this forward, because the Speaker's ruling, I think, was fine. To send it to committee to study this unprecedented demand by the House of Commons to determine how and whether this should happen, and quite frankly, whether parliamentarians should be doing this. But what I can say is that despite all of the ridiculousness, despite all of the kind of silly games that the Conservatives are playing, we've been able to pass a couple of pieces of legislation. We've been able to get the GST holiday through. We're going to get the opposition day done and get this really important funding that is going to things like the dental care program, like the Canadian Armed Forces. We're hearing from the Americans that, they want us to get our defense spending up. Well, there's defense spending in the supplementary estimates. So, here's a perfect opportunity for the Conservatives to put their money where their mouth is. Let's do something that is going to help Canada as we stand up and protect our Canadian economy. There's money in there for Ukraine right now. Again, the Conservatives, last year ragged the puck, voted against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Let's do something that's actually going to help Canada, right, help our friends and allies around the world. So, there's real things in there that have an impact on Canadians and on Canada's standing in the world. So, this is really the Conservatives just trying to break Parliament and trying to break things right now. But, we're going to get this done, and we're going to deliver it for Canadians ahead of the holidays.
Okay, you got your tax holiday through the House of Commons, but you haven't yet found a partner to support the idea of the checks going to people after April 1. Chrystia Freeland, in that press conference I referenced earlier, said there are vigorous conversations happening with the opposition. Is that a finance minister conversation, or is that a House leader conversation? Like, are you negotiating the finer points of that, and what can you tell us about whether you're close to a compromise on those checks?
Yeah, that's a different area than me.
Okay.
As much as I love policy, as the House leader, my job is more operational as opposed to policy at this moment in time.
Okay, so the Conservatives are the first opposition day up, and that's going to be, if they go ahead with the motion that they put out on social media, it's the confidence motion using Jagmeet Singh's words against the NDP leader to try to shame him into voting non-confidence in your government. He said today, and Don Davies said last week, they weren't going to play Mr. Poilievre's games. But do you know if they still, the Conservatives, are intent on going ahead with a non-confidence motion on their opposition day? And there would be a vote on Monday, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. So my understanding is that that is the case. I mean, that's what they were saying in question period today. So, but they could change it up until the last minute. But look, I mean, this is so lame and pathetic that they are using these kind of schoolyard tactics that are really just kind of dumb, if you will, to try and bully people, over something that's quite important, actually, in our country. So, I mean, I think again, this is just a typical pattern of behavior from this group of Conservative members of Parliament. That instead of doing something that's meaningful, they're trying to be bullies and just really kind of make a joke out of this place, and I think that's kind of sad.
But you have to find a path forward, do you not? I mean, whether it is on principle or a political tactic, this has shut everything down for months now. I mean, do you anticipate when you all come back from the break that you're still in this treadmill of a privilege motion and nothing gets done? I mean, how do you even deliver a budget in those circumstances?
Well, I'll just push back a little bit and say that we are getting stuff done. I mean, we did the GST tax holiday for Canadians, and we're going to get supply, which is going to deliver, as you mentioned, almost over $22 billion worth of programs for Canadians. So even though the Conservatives are playing this ridiculous game in the place behind me, we're still doing really important things for Canadians, and we're still governing this country in a way that I think is effective. So, the Conservatives are being silly. We are being serious, and I think that's what Canadians expect of their politicians, that we all be serious and we all, put Canada, to use the Conservatives' words, first.
Government House Leader Karina Gould, always appreciate the time. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Okay, we're going to bring back the power panel on this. Emily Nicolas, Françoise Boivin, Michelle Cadario, and Kate Harrison. Emily, I wonder what you make of this. When Jagmeet Singh said all of those words when he tore up the supply and confidence agreement, I asked him, I said, someone's going to put this in a motion to try to get you to vote for it. You're going to have to eat your own words. He seems prepared to do it. Is this embarrassing for Singh, or will people buy the argument that now is just not the time to have an election?
It is embarrassing, and it is also not the time. Both can be true at the same time. You did warn him that this could be played that way, because that's the way politics seems to be played nowadays. However, it would be very ill advised for him to be triggering an election right now, just in terms of the NDP being ready for this. This is December 3rd, right before Christmas. Nobody believes the government is going to be falling, and we're going to go into an election for Christmas. So it's an empty threat at this point, and I think everybody knows it. However, it is tricky for Jagmeet Singh to be going that far in his words and then being like, yes, I want the Trudeau government to stay in power. He does need to justify that by saying that he's not playing Pierre Poilievre's game, and he just basically doesn't want a Conservative government. Yves-François Blanchet has been saying the same thing, is that they're not necessarily voting for Trudeau, they're voting non-confidence in a future Pierre Poilievre government, basically, is what they're doing. And so as long as that's their line of communication, I think that people who understand how politics work will also understand how they're voting on the non-confident motion that is coming.
Well, Françoise, it is a bit clever, I guess, for Mr. Blanchet to describe it as a preemptive vote of non-confidence in Prime Minister Poilievre. But, Jagmeet Singh keeps finding ways to support a government he says has miserably failed Canadians, despite tearing up the supply and confidence agreement. But I wonder, going back to our earlier conversation, can you really plunge government into caretaker mode with 40-something days to satisfy Donald Trump? You've got to have a border package, you've got to have a response to avoid the tariffs. I mean, the wisdom of forcing an election right now. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a month ago, I was thinking that it would have been the right timing just to have a full-fledged government inside a parliament that is right now so paralyzed, doing absolutely nothing. It doesn't bode well when you have somebody as unpredictable as Donald Trump on the other side. But at the same time, now being the 3rd of December, it's absolutely the worst timing. Nobody wants to see. I mean, they would punish all. Maybe nobody would go out and vote because they'd be so fed up about these politicians. So the window is definitely in 2025. Of that, I am sure at 99.9%. As a good politician, I always leave myself a little.
It's like ivory soap. It's 99 and 44/100%, right? Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But yes, you don't want to be in limbo before Donald Trump gets on his throne. At the same time, we're still feeble. We're still weak because he knows it. And on his side, maybe Justin Trudeau will be reelected. Maybe whatever will happen. I don't know. But that being said, it's always going to be big question mark. And Jagmeet Singh, well, he's hoping that nobody will remember what he said at the time. It seems that for a deal signed, Trudeau is no good, but for one piece of legislation might be good. I thought he skated pretty well today, saying, I'm not falling for the Conservatives, which is a good catch-all phrase when you are not a Conservative nowadays.
Look, and Kate, you can understand why Jagmeet Singh wouldn't want to help Pierre Poilievre in any way, shape, or form, but these are his words. These are his positions. He took them rather theatrically when he ripped up, as he said, the agreement. There are times in political life when you should end your sentence with, and I can't imagine how this will ever come back to haunt me, because this is one of those moments. You know?
It's a bit karmic. He did make a big stink about ripping up the agreement. He has had multiple occasions now to pull down the government. He hasn't done it, and he will have to eat his own words on this one. So to Emily's comment, it is embarrassing, but there's a couple of different messes that Jagmeet Singh has on his hands. Of course, he doesn't want to have an election right now because Canadians probably don't want to head to the polls right before the holidays. But he has a bit of an optics problem. There was that image circulating online of him getting into a Maserati on the Hill, somebody who's supposed to be fighting for the working class. He's standing up there today saying Pierre Poilievre has no idea what it is workers want. But it's Jagmeet Singh who's now kind of stood by twice when the government has used the CIRB to get workers back on the job. So there seems to be a bit of a brand conflict that I observe with Jagmeet Singh. He is getting wedged on his own words, and for the constituency that he ostensibly wants to be satisfying right now, which is working Canadians, he's let them down on quite a few occasions and shown himself to maybe not be in lockstep with what workers are thinking and feeling.
But on the caretaker question, right? If this motion somehow passes, the government can't do anything to satisfy President Trump because of the election and the caretaker mode they go into. So, do you think the Conservatives, I know they want to bring this government down and have a carbon tax election as soon as possible, but in this narrow window, is it smart to try to do that, given what would happen if you can't respond to it?
An election would provide some certainty, and I think there would be a case to be made for the Liberals and the Conservatives that we have a new U.S. administration, and it's important the next government has a clear mandate on how they would look to deliver for Canada and in relation to that relationship. So I'm not sure that Canadians would look at a decision to go to the polls all that negatively at the moment. I think that they want some certainty from their federal government and to know there's a plan, and if an election is a way of bringing about that certainty, then I'm not sure Canadians would be all that averse to it.
I could not disagree with you more. I've got to say, I think that...
This is a theme tonight. Anyway, keep going.
I know, people would be surprised by that. But seriously, in the next 40 days, honest to God, if there's a time when you don't have an election, never mind that it's over the holidays, but if there's a time when you actually have promised to put legislation forward and to get it passed, to be able to ward off crippling tariffs. So now is the time that they're going to try and bring down the government and have an election so that they can all be on the doors and nothing happens. Let's face it, nothing would happen until after the president was already in office.
We're making a lot of assumptions. We're making an assumption that the Liberals actually have a plan, and we're making an assumption that Trump would proceed.
Well,
those are two very
no,
big
Well,
it's not.
Don't we have to
The
assume
government
Trump will
needs a plan.
proceed?
The government needs a plan. They're coming forward with a plan, and they've talked about it. And so, if there was an absence of anything else coming forward, perhaps. But honest to God, I can't believe that the Conservative Party would want to actually take away any kind of advantage and any kind of a way to dissuade Mr. Trump from actually imposing the tariffs. If their political instincts are that they are more important than Canadian manufacturing, than Canadian jobs in the auto sector, than Canadian jobs in the energy sector, go for it. I think it's a completely disingenuous kind of a motion. I think Jagmeet is doing the exact right thing as a Canadian to not do it. I appreciate what he said before.
I don't know if he's doing it for the caretaker mode argument that I'm raising, because it dawned on me Friday when we were thinking about this, is that, okay, if the government does end up in an election, it will go past the 20th of January, because by the time we get to the vote and it all happens. So there, it may be clarifying in terms of position and approach. There's no doubt an election would do that. But in the time frame the president-elect says, I mean, you have to take him seriously because he's done this before. You wouldn't be able to respond as a country, never mind the parties.
Yeah, I think it is the defense of workers and the defense of Canadian interests that Conservatives are talking about. And they have been very clear that the government doesn't have a plan to defend those interests. They are coming forward with solutions of how they would propose to do the same. And there is an argument that Canadians should have a say. We have been in this do-si-do with the Liberals and the NDP for some time now. The NDP supposedly has no confidence, but enough confidence that they're going to keep them around. Like, which one is it? I think Canadians are right to be asking Jagmeet Singh where he actually stands on this, because, again, he made a big deal out of ripping up the agreement, and then, 24 times has voted with the Liberals to keep them in power.
Okay, Canadians have had their say. We have a government. We have a government in power. We have a parliament that is working. They just passed some legislation now.
It's struggling. There's no question for a lot of reasons.
There's an opportunity to work. And so let's not pretend that we're a completely dysfunctional country. We're not. And if people want to work together, we can roll up our sleeves and get something done.
Emily, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that when people are twinning on set, it brings a fighting energy.
Yes, they're dressed alike, but they do not think alike. I think that is very clear tonight. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my main thought right now that's occurring to me. But beyond that, I do think that it's beyond reason that there would be an election during Christmas time, let alone the tariff. It's not something that is done. There's a lot of things that aren't usually done that have been done in recent years, but this would be crossing a different kind of line. There's also the issue of course, of caretaking. When Donald Trump becomes inaugurated, and beyond the tariff issue, I do think that what we have now is volatility from the president-elect, soon to be president, and he's likely to keep being volatile. Keep tweeting things that are big policy announcement that could impact us, and it's likely to be tricky for Canada to go into a caretaking government mode under a Donald Trump presidency at any time, actually, because of the unpredictability of the president, and also because of how he tends to take advantage of people's weakness. And Canadians being in an election is a weakness. And so regardless of what happens in the next month and with this current policy proposal, I will be watching out for Donald Trump trying to take advantage of our division, our partisan division, and also trying to take advantage of our electoral process when that happens. And that's when we're going to be learning that foreign interference and the weakness of Canadian democracy isn't just something that is coming from very far away lands that we don't see as friendly lands.
Yeah, when you put it all together like that, Emily, 2025 is going to be exhausting. Françoise, I got about 30 seconds, but this is the challenge in Canada, right? There's all the different federal parties and their competing interests. Then there's all of the provinces and the territories and their competing interests. And you have to pull it all together to deal with arguably the most unpredictable president in the history.
Pretty much.
I would say he's top two, and Trump one might have been number one. Anyway, your last 30 seconds on this.
Well, I will just say, we know all that, and we are all what you just described. That's the strength and sometimes the weakness of Canada. But we're as strong as our weakest point and what our weakest link. So that's why we need Team Canada. At the time I heard an interview with Rona Ambrose, and I was thinking of when Brian Mulroney was there. Maybe we need some type of Captain Canada that is outside our politicians, because they're all children right now. Just look at how they're acting in the House of Commons, because we don't want an election because, it's an uncertainty. But at the same time, we have zero, really, parliament. Anybody who tells me that it's functioning, it is not functioning.
No, it's not great. It's not great.
To say that it's just going to be on a position motion, make me laugh. That's not what parliament is supposed to be about. And that you have to play games to get some extra money to come to certain department. I mean, this is sad. I thought only the Americans lived those moments. Now we know Canada can live those too. So it's kind of sad, but we have to maybe find some lead. Maybe a leader will get up from the whole bunch and put us all straightforward.
Well, look, it's a larger conversation for another day, but the nature of partisanship now is very different than when I started covering politics 20-odd years ago, and I don't know if it's better. That's what I'll say about it. All right, I want to thank you all. This was fun. Thank our power, Emily Nicolas, Francois Bovin, Michelle Cadario, she's on the right, and Kate Harrison on the left because of dress like.